This real-side experience would be another future view, a potential situation that humanity as a species may find as their collective experience. On a previous galactic Skype, I shared a future view regarding the possibility of the planet being converted completely into a Borg-like tech world, where all of humanity would be converted through any contact with any part of this now mechanically converted planet, and indeed the entirety of humanity was assimilated through the twisted consciousness intent inclinations of a new AI. That was, in fact, the most recent view I had received regarding the effects humanity may walk into through agreements as they then currently stand. This view I will be sharing now, as I said, was another future view, but in fact a real side experience I had been shown prior to the mechanical world conversion experience, and so actually would not be then the most recent future so-called view, but nevertheless I will share it here. In isness reality terms, as everything is here and now, this would include all the ideas as created and forged through the body vehicles, the ideas that then are incorporated into the consciousness, a consciousness that has all the current files or ideas that make the current simulator what it is. For to experience a simulator, awareness must take on the ideas of it in its current state, the overall game as it is currently decided to be, through the consciousness that affects it, like choosing a particular computer game, where to do so we must upload the game as it currently stands onto our computers. Then the game, the simulator, is effected onto our screens, just as our consciousness-affected body vehicles allow the means of decoding the simulator ideas into experience. And so, we have a collective consciousness by virtue of these ideas being the same, the ideas, the data file of the simulator, that to be in a particular simulator, all consciousnesses, all computers, must have the files, ideas that affect it, and then, with all awareness that is operating through this collective simulator affecting a consciousness, are additional ideas created, or ideas created by others agreed with, that are uploaded then into a consciousness, and affect the nature of whatever the ideas happen to be. A simulator stadium all beings residing within will share, as they share the ideas that affect it, and if ideas are shared, so will be the effect experience, the experience of the overall simulator arena or stadium, and potentially then we can encounter any being in the simulator, irrespective of where in it they are placed. But aside from the overall simulator affecting consciousness ideas, will be the additional ideas that each individual decides and agrees with, that affect body form, and creational positioning. Clearly then, the more ideas an individual shares with another, the closer their experiences will converge. And we have then a species, such as humans, where every individual must have incorporated into their consciousness the ideas that have effected the same experience, that being as a human body type and being stationed on the earth. And then, as further ideas match up, so we will find individuals not only on the same planet, but the same country, the same street, indulging the same hobbies and pastimes, etc. And as much as we have a collective overall consciousness that affects the overall simulator stadium, we have smaller collectives within that. The human species could be construed as a collective consciousness through the ideas between all the individuals involved that are shared, that effect positioning on the earth. And just like the ideas that make up the collective consciousness that affects a simulator as it currently stands, that awareness must take on to operate in a particular simulator, so it must be that if a particular species and planet is targeted as a specific experience, then the ideas that the species' collective consciousness that affects that species and planet's circumstances as they currently stand must be taken on and consciousness incorporated. It's all just files, computer-like data, ideas that once consciousness installed affect the corresponding simulation, and so we can be positioned anywhere creationally. It just depends on what ideas we take on. But very easy must it be to find oneself locked into a particular species if the ideas that affect its collective situation are attached to, and then we are resigned to the effects of them. And if the ideas are very much a particular species related, we can rather find ourselves anchored to that species. And it's not inconceivable that individuals may never explore much beyond a certain species and creational positionings, for to be locked into a social consciousness of a particular species is an indoctrination into the ideas that pertain to that species, and like all ideas that once incorporated into the consciousness are never released, never unattached to, unless a decision, intent is made to face and release the ideas of the consciousness, then as these ideas affect always their nature, all too easy would it be to be mired into one species lifetime after lifetime, as the ideas that pertain to it are compounded. The collective consciousness of the human species is very much an overall slave idea based theme of control extended to the reptilian dark forces in all their expressions, as this agreement, this contract between the two groups of beings has been established and maintained for the longest time, and so the human collective consciousness always affects this enslaved and controlled overall situation as overall human experience. And just like a simulator, if selected by awareness, will be a taking on of the ideas that affect it as it currently stands, as I said, so to be part of a species has the ideas of its collective consciousness also taken on, and in regards to humanity, to take on a human and planet Earth position, this must be then the overall slave idea theme that is the human collective consciousness. And just as we then create and agree with ideas in addition to whatever the baseline simulator ideas happen to be, this would be the case with humanity. What additional agreements are being made within the human farming prison yard as affected from the overall baseline slave idea collective consciousness? Most agreements that impact then the entirety of humanity are those which are globally implemented, and will be ideas then installed overwhelmingly by the reptilian dark forces, who, understanding how consciousness affects a simulation, so these ideas must be incorporated into the human collective consciousness in order for experience collectively that favours the dark forces to become so. And from this prison yard slave foundation that has been established, so the controllers continually seek to implement ideas into the consciousness of humanity that will further progress the control and subjugation of the human species. And through their various means and methods, their programming abilities, via the technology, with their various attention-grabbing, agreement-gleaning themes, predictive programming, etc., as it has been termed, so they can install these agreements. And as I said earlier, the overall collective simulator affecting a consciousness is whatever it happens to be, idea-wise, in the nowness of the isness reality, and including the smaller collectives, humanity, consciousness, etc. All the agreements implanted will be present now. If the overall humanity experience be a movie, then all the idea agreements that make that movie what it is are present now. The completion of the movie is instantly so with the consciousness that affects it. But as a consciousness also has decided this somewhat sequential rollout of ideas to effects on the physical, even though humanity's movie is completed in actuality, based on the agreements as they currently stand, through the consciousness-affected body vehicles, so the human body form rather processes the ideas through to their conclusion, through the idea decoding apparatus. We rather have to sit through the human experience movie that is already complete in reality. And so it follows that if the humanity consciousness ideas that affect the movie are retained, the movie rolls out to its conclusion on the physical. But should the agreements change, then the movie must do likewise. Some agreements are more easily implanted by the controllers than others, and hence become human overall experience. Some are not so easily accepted, and so the controllers will install or attempt to various ideas, all along controlling lines, all designed to escalate the control of humanity, all variations on the overall controlling theme, and again, the additional agreement ideas can only become human experience if the agreements are maintained. And so, we are shown on the real side, in regards to human collective agreements, the agreements that will effect the corresponding human overall experience as they currently stand in the moment we are shown them, which must be maintained for them to process through to the physical, or they will not come to pass, and we may be shown then still further views of what agreements have now replaced the prior ones. Future views then, which simply are that which are the agreements as they currently stand, as revealed on the real side, aside from the processing of a cause to effect through the consciousness, and what are as yet to play out on the physical, again, if maintained. So we are always shown potentialities, and this particular future view as another potentiality, though, as I said, one that preceded the previous mechanical planet conversion view, and would be eerily similar to the themes as portrayed in the movie The Quiet Place. For the controllers do like to show and reveal their plans for humanity through the movies, but also where we place our attention, what claims our focus, is another means of idea agreement installing, as the mechanics of the body vehicles indiscriminately incorporate all ideas that claim our focus and attention and install them, and then the effects will play out accordingly in whatever way they might. This is why certain themes are hammered through the controllers' technology, computer gamers, movies, etc., in the attempt to install certain ideas into the human consciousness that they can play out consequently, and not to mention the subliminal notions and themes, for the human senses can only consciously process so much information, and so what slips by our conscious acknowledgement will be installed as idea agreements just as readily. And so, unsurprisingly, movie themes that impact strongly the consciousness, that are successfully installed as idea agreements, can become then collective human agreements that we have shown to us on the real side, and the future views then can uncannily resemble such movies, which again, if the successful installing of the agreement is maintained, so will these movie themes play out as human experience. The Quiet Place was a movie where asteroids had impacted the Earth, had contained these creatures that, although seemed to lack the ability to see or smell, had an overdeveloped hearing facility, that any sound would instantly attract them, and they would be motivated to kill that which had produced the sound. Consequently, humanity was all but wiped out, but for a few survivors, who would spend then the entirety of the movie being as quiet as possible, for the moment they made any kind of sound or noise. So would these creatures be drawn to them and kill them. This real side experience would be, as I said, a future view and along these themes, and I would be afforded a view through the consciousness of one of the individuals whose agreements, as a part of the agreement collective that is humanity, would then have him experience, if the agreement to this particular idea was maintained. For as real awareness is this one overall awareness isness that is through everything a consciousness constructed, the ideas that affect the individual body forms and situations, then all these ideas are available to the real awareness and can be shown to the personal self. We can be shown as though we're watching a movie, an aside from simulation perspective, or we can view through the consciousness vehicle of one of the participants of this particular agreement effect. This one overall real awareness that is effectively just viewing through another consciousness that is in reality its own, but a consciousness that from the real awareness disconnected personal self perspective would consider to be separate from all others. And depending on if we maintain our real awareness connection or not, during such a view through another consciousness, dictates if we realize we are simply viewing from the perspective of another, or if we think at the time of the experience that the other is who we are, as sometimes the real awareness will disconnect and have us then think we are the participants of that which we are being shown, as this adds intensity to the experience, as opposed from the indifference we may have as we recognize it is only an afforded view. For if I step into the consciousness of another, I take on all that which it comprises of, all its ideas, memories, etc., and from the disconnected from real awareness, personal self perspective, so a transition from one consciousness to another, and the personal self simply takes on that consciousness, and for all intents and purposes, that is what it currently is. How would you have a memory of a transference of a consciousness, as that which you are transferred to would have only memories and references as it pertained to its own consciousness, like two separate computer gamers that have no references that pertain to each other, and only the computer game operator, the real awareness, if connection to it is maintained, would realize the switching between the gamers. The personal self, the computer game characters, would not, absent of this real awareness, computer game operator connection. And so, as I said, the real awareness selected an individual whose agreements, as part of the overall human collective agreements will project him and humanity into the effects of the nature of the agreement if it is maintained, and so would I be additionally temporarily disconnected from the real awareness and experience the effects as agreed to that are through the consciousness affected vehicle of another. And just as it was in the movie The Quiet Place, so humanity overall had been decimated population-wise by these various monstrous creatures. Just like the movie, the creatures' ability to locate and kill any humans was strictly sound dependent, and so the surviving humans, one of which I was viewing through the consciousness affected apparatus of, had to be as silent as possible, or these creatures that covered every inch of the earth would track them down and kill them. No detail was afforded as to the means by which these creatures had found their way to earth, as the view afforded was one in which the situation was such that the creatures had already established themselves and wiped out most of humanity. The only difference between the movie and this future view was the body types of the creatures. The movie versions were of a particular, a sort of quasi-bipedal clawed humanoid-like form. In this experience, they were more along the lines of quadrupeds, like gigantic horned, almost bull-like creatures, the size of dinosaurs, and with leathery, elephantine skins. As from the perspective view of this individual, would I be operating with various survivors, and inevitably would noise be made that attracted these creatures, that I would get a very close view of them. As on a few occasions they were within a touching distance, as we would stand still, barely daring to breathe, as they swung their huge, malformed heads back and forth, trying to pinpoint our position through any noise we may create. Interestingly, there was an individual, a woman, who seemed to think that there was a certain point or boundary where should anyone cross beyond the threshold of, so would safety be assured, and any noise and sound made beyond that boundary wouldn't therefore matter, as the creatures would be unable to cross it. I'm uncertain if this was a literal situation, or more symbolic, and representing that as agreements affect situation and circumstance, and as it pertains to the influx of others in our experience, beasts and monsters included, that should certain agreements be released or not present, so that which effects into our experience from these ideas will be consequently absent also. If I have no agreements that dictate a monster can kill me, this then can't be effected into my experience, as it is always the programming of the ideas of the consciousness that yield the corresponding simulation, and a monster may be present in my experience, but if it can kill me or not is that which I decide, as our experience is always forged from the ideas we agree to. that we upload to our consciousness-affecting experience. Take any movie and see how certain participants within the experience conveyed are wiped out by the monsters, and yet others seemingly can always survive, and indeed some make it to the end of the movie. The monsters are the same, but the agreements in the consciousness of each individual differ, and so this affects experience where some survive, some do not, and some make it to the closing credits. And so, maybe this stepping beyond a certain boundary where safety was assured represented this stepping aside or releasing the ideas that dictated death by these creatures. Alas, this didn't seem to be the case for this woman. For as she stood beyond the threshold or boundary that she indicated as being that which presented as a safe haven, and as the creatures charged her, as she made as much noise as possible to prove her claims, the beasts would slam into her and maul her, slaying her in an instant. The real side experience would end there, and as I said, another potentiality that may befall humanity's overall experience, as another idea that had been implanted as an agreement, that was in actuality, in effect now, in isness, reality terms, and was shown to my personal self as a possibility, another variation of that which the controllers wish to bring to human experience, as that which would be for overall controlling a benefit if the agreements were maintained and it became physical level manifest. For as a slave species does begin to rattle their chains, so the controllers tend wipe them out, depopulate, through whatever means they can, and this then would be another viable option. For even as a slave becomes conscious of their controlled situation, their agreements to the controllers that had facilitated, effected their experiential predicament is maintained, until the process of consciousness facing and idea releasing, the process of awareness, is undertaken. For the disconnected from real awareness personal self is then in full agreement with the consciousness and every idea it comprises of, and as humanity's overall agreement is based on ideas of control acceptance, then control will always be the human's experience until these ideas are faced and released, the bulk of which are subconscious and were accumulated through many lifetimes of agreement to slavery ideas. And despite transition of death, the consciousness, if clung to in its entirety, as it will be, absent of the embracing of the awareness process, will always project its nature. The slave idea will express effect again into a further enslaved creational experience under the lash of the controllers that the agreement is extended to. And so, when an enslaved species, such as humans, becomes a little too aware of their control, so to pull the plug, to wipe them out, to depopulate, is always a utilised option, as the agreements to control are still maintained, with a little period spent in the designated heavens of man, which are an expression effect also of a placement creationally through agreement to control maintained, as the consciousness is overall based on a control agreement which affects controlled life levels or creational dimensions beyond the physical also, and on a transition, with the inevitable return back to a physical level embodiment, as a consciousness held to always has the effects it contains that must be experienced, an endless cycle of incarnation that can only be broken if that which affects them, the consciousness of ideas, are faced and released. If we can turn off the computer game we have always played, so to speak, and walk away from the computer.
Big challenge for everybody every day to wake up, and plenty of knowledge here provided and hints as to what's going on. So again, the fun part is we are here to become more aware, and we get to share. It's very, very important and essential. So yes, thank you so much. All these things, it's overwhelming actually what we're doing here, Kevin. But it's great that you're here and others too. So things are happening, and you see it on the real side. So there's a lot of agreement, and we get to take part in this. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you.